There we go.
All right. Welcome, everyone. My name is Risha Burke, and I'm the Executive Director of Community Development Halton. I have met many of you, but not necessarily all of you, so I hope I get a chance to connect throughout our hour together this morning. I see some friends from the Halton Hills, Acton area, and others from around the rest of the region, so that's really exciting. So thank you so much for being here. It is Community Day to Watch Friday, so and so hopefully you're in the right place. But this is a monthly event that we have. So I'm going to share my screen. As we said, we are recording. We won't record the small group conversations or any of our chit chat together, but so get us to the beginning. Can everyone? Do I have the right screen up? Can you see that?
Yep.
Awesome. Good stuff. All right. Today we are talking about a community profile of Acton. We have done something different, so I'm really excited to share that with you. But first we're going to start with the land acknowledgement. So we acknowledge that Halton is rich in the history and modern traditions of Indigenous people. Halton is on the traditional lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit, part of the Anishinaabe Nation that extends from the Niagara Peninsula across Hamilton, Halton, and Toronto to the Rouge River Valley. We thank the Mississauga of the Credit First Nations for sharing this traditional territory with us. We also recognize the enduring presence of Indigenous people on this land. And yeah, I just want to just take the time to, reflect this morning, just thinking about the land that it is that connects us and things that I noticed this morning. I, just the small pleasures in life that I'm really grateful for is walking the dog. Often I tell a walking the dog story at this stage, but these are sort of like really meaningful times for me when I take time to reflect, even in my suburban landscape. But Robbie, my dog, and I took time to actually watch a robin for a really long time. I didn't want the dog to disturb it as it was collecting food for its babes. And to take back to the nest, it was pecking away at a worm, and it was a really large task for this wee robin. And it was just quite an incredible sort of opportunity just to watch nature, and it seemed to know that we were waiting for it. And we literally stood on the sidewalk for 5 minutes watching this robin work away, and it was almost like a little yeah, a little bit of neighborhood cooperation as we gave it space. And I was just really feeling grateful. Sometimes I feel very small in this world. You know what? And that's okay. Yes, I think we're all taken care of, even the birds. And it was so cool to watch it successfully fly away with this big, huge robin. And was just feeling grateful for the space that I live in and the peace that I had this morning. So I just wanted to share that gratitude with you this morning. For those of you who are not familiar with us, we are Community Development Halton, and a number of folks from our team are here. I also saw some of our peer researchers as well on the call, which is really exciting. So thank you for being here. We like to say connecting community is what we do. And we do that through a couple different ways. One is through Volunteer Halton, which offers workshops and advocacy. And we just had beautiful National Volunteer Week. Maybe saw some of you out there in community, so that was really exciting. Just finished that. They also big QR code. If you're looking for volunteer opportunities, get your phones up right now while I pause and tell you that we are the regional operator for Volunteer Connector, and this is a portal with hundreds of opportunities for volunteering. And if you are an agency that needs volunteers, this is a spot for you to post that. And our team, Heather and Karen, who are on the call, I heard them doing workshops on how to do successful postings, and they have a regular opportunity to connect to learn how to use the portal. So please connect with us if volunteerism is part of what you do or part of what you want to be. We also like to pay attention to important information. And so these are just some stats from one of our more recent Community Data Watch publications. And you'll see some numbers there, like 15.1% of people in poverty in the Milton community based on 2022 tax filer data. And we pay attention to that information. And we tell the story about what's happening in our community with the data, as well as qualitatively with what people are telling us in our community. So, and we're going to do both of those things today through today's presentation. I want to take the time to thank people who support our work. So a huge thanks to the financial support of the regional municipality of Holton. And obviously also to the United Way of Holton and Hamilton for their financial support. Those two organizations or institutions in our community are huge supporters of ours, and we are grateful for that. Also, there are a number of you who actually took time in our community to peer review this publication that you have a link to and that we'll talk about today. People who provided us with insights and advice, and we've taken that and we thank you. And also a special shout out today to those who actually participated in Near and Dear Acton to co-create this publication, and I'm going to talk a bit more about that. So why is the town of Acton important to talk about, our community of Acton? Because it's great. It's a great place. I love Acton. Our main office is actually in Acton, and too many times people say to me, "Oh, is Acton actually part of Halton?" And it is, a great place. You know, we sort of a tagline, it's worth the drive. I asked if it's okay to still say that. It is worth the drive to Acton, 110%, and we need to know more about this community. Taking a deep dive into a community of this size, it's just under 10,000 people, has been a really interesting and lovely opportunity. And I think the model of what we've done for this publication might be something that we can do for other parts of our Holton community. What we know about Acton is sometimes the numbers don't always tell the whole story. And we know that there's wisdom in community that needs to be shared. So we decided to do something really different for this publication. And I believe it was it was actually Don Pangman from Art House who said, we need to know more about Acton, and he's on our research advisory committee, and we took that to heart. And we thought, let's do this from the ground up. So we actually took data and we shared it with folks in community. In Acton, we held an event back in March, and then we used an assets-based community development approach to talk a bit more about that to define what is strong in Acton, and we paired that with what the gaps or the challenges were, and we've co-created a paper for you with the wisdom of community baked into this. So I'm pretty excited about that. We think that assets-based community development is a great practice for getting to the rest of the community story to the surface beyond the numbers. So the data that we use in the publication is lots of 2021 Statistics Canada census data. And we also have a little bit of Halton Food Security Survey data, a little bit of the Home Belonging Survey. That's a sneak peek for you. We have Our Kids Network, Kindergarten Parent Survey data, Halton Information Providers Database information, and of course, Acton community members and supporters from the Near and Dear Acton event and their insights. So you'll see these bubbles to the side. Whenever you see those on the page, that means that is like the thinking and the wisdom of community that is showing up on that page from folks in Acton. There's going to be limitations to the data. So the home foods survey data, just flag for anyone who was on our last call, data collection isn't consistent across all of the communities. So we're not going to take too much of a deep dive, but Acton actually responded very in high numbers to that survey. So it's a fairly credible source for Acton. But people sometimes we might have double counts. There's some measurement challenges and surface level changes across time. The belonging survey is a small Acton sample, but it's pretty cool grassroots community data. And so we thought pretty important. It's not a stratified sample. It's just a very random sample. So it's not going to tell the whole story, but it's going to give us a bit of insight, and then paired with community wisdom. So we think that the community wisdom is helping to make up for some of the limitations of the data. Just gonna throw in a quote, and you'll say, why does she have an acorn? And if you know me well, you'll understand the acorn. But this is a quote from Damon Harges, and he's a community developer out of the States. And he says, find the gifts and talents of everyone in the community. Find a place for that gift. Utilize that gift in ways that build community, economy, and mutual delight. And this is really him describing assets-based community development. And I think acorns, I actually have a whole bowl of acorns right here. There's an example of one right here. You see that? I love them. It's like nature with hats, another one of my gratitudes in life. And see that looks like a crocheted cap. And think an oak tree the gift of the acorn is like this beautiful oak tree grows out of this, and it's a delight to see. It feeds the squirrels, and I just love acorns, and so I love to throw them in where I can. But they're just like it's a gift, and for me, they're like a metaphor of the gift of all that is possible when we bring people together and their gifts and talents in community, and pair that with businesses and organizations, and we can see what can blossom in community. And so a little bit about assets-based community development, just to give you some insight before we dig into the data. We often talk, this is from John McKnight, who was sort of one of the grandfathers of assets-based community development in the States. He passed this past November, and he talks about the 7 functions of community: enabling health, assuring security, stewarding ecology, shaping local economies, contributing to local food production, raising children, and co-creating care. And when we spend time in Acton, I see all of those things happening. The 7 functions of community doing things for themselves in that particular community. And I love how all of those functions really show up. And in assets-based community development, we think about how community can do those things for itself first, and then how do institutions and other pieces fall in to come alongside. So, but I can think of a story from our conversation that fits into all of those functions from Acton. At the heart of ABCD, assets-based community development, is the pursuit of what is strong in community, not what is wrong. And so you'll see that the rest of the presentation is sort of, we've got these categories that you'll hear about: human capital, or individuals and their gifts, the gifts of the head, hands, and heart. We spent time learning about what is amazing about the folks in Acton at our Near and Dear event. Associations, these are groups where 2 or more folks get together around a common passion. These are service clubs, neighborhood groups, informal groups, faith groups. Institutions are our municipalities, our healthcare, social service agencies, our libraries. We have someone from, I think Lee is here from the library. Our libraries show up in big ways in Halton, which I'm always grateful for. Places like parks and trails and third spaces in community. Then there's the local economy, and we talked a lot about this in Acton and the huge role that small business owners, and I know that we have, I think Ario is here, a small business owner in the Acton community, and the role that they play. Culture and story, sharing how assets have gathered and encourage us to do even more together. It's how we celebrate what we're doing. So here's a little bit of a picture. You can see some of the cool folks that are learning about each other right there in this picture. We did this at the Roxy Center. It was in March. The first Saturday of March break, and 30 people showed up. It was just quite the thing. We considered the data, some of the data that I'm going to share with you today. We defined gaps in the community, and then we talked through what is strong in Acton. And I considered what might be possible, focusing on the strengths. I don't know if there's others who are here that wanted to share, but I know that Andrea from the library wasn't able to be here, and she asked me to actually share just a little bit about her experience. She says, I was always thrilled to be able to attend this event to represent Halton Hills Public Library. I try and focus on my energies of making sure we truly understand what the community needs and wants, and events like this one give us a great insight to what's happening around us. So she had some lovely things around making connections at Near and Dear, and how she has now a larger group of people to share information with and get information from, so that they can begin to find ways to work together successfully. So she was Andrea was away, but she was like, oh, I'm so mad I'm missing this. So I'd like just to share some of the impact of what that's had. It was a really neat way to bring so many folks together and connect them and learn more. So what I'm going to do, you're going to see that we have Acton assets and individuals, and you're going to get some data, and then you're also going to get information from folks in community. Hopefully this is all making sense to you, weaving together all of the pieces. So we know there's just under 10,000 folks who live in Acton, and more than 61% of Acton residents are aged 25 to 64, hold a post-secondary certificate, interesting, diploma or degree, which is with over 20% attaining a bachelor's degree. That's 11% have an apprenticeship trade. So here's some of the neat skills that folks in Acton have. You can see architecture, engineering, and then followed by business management, and then 17% with health related kind of skills that they bring to community. Other types of skills that we know in community, this comes from the conversation, is that we have lots of volunteers and community connectors. So local business owners who serve as Acton boosters, citizens working in nonprofit or municipal roles supporting community needs. There's Acton-based artists, which is really cool to hear about, faith leaders, elected officials, and volunteers contributing their time and care through grassroots organizations, associations, and nonprofits. So yeah, there are people in communities with fairly large circles of acquaintances, and they know everyone and they are connectors. And these are really important folks to be able to weave through to take the challenges that are addressed in community. And those community connectors help make things happen. So these are some of the things that community listed for us. We know that community connectors are gift-centered and they recognize and focus on the strengths of individuals. They're well connected with associational life and civic life. They're trusted, and they believe in the potential of community members. So these are important people for us to be looking for. These are, so it's not a number data point, but it's a qualitative data point. When you're able to find folks who are deriving joy from bringing people together, these are folks that you need to identify for community building. And this is information from John McKnight and Peter Block. Oops. Institutions. So institutions, again, are those more formal organizations. So lots of amazing information that that we were able to get about the number of community services in Acton. So they're a vital asset in Acton. They play a crucial role in fostering well-being, social cohesion, and resilience. They provide essential supports. You can see there's organizations by number, by major category, ones that support individual and family life. Basic, that's 34. 16 do basic needs, 10 with organizational, so that could be food security, for example. Organizations, community international services, healthcare, mental health, substance use disorder, education supports. So the Halton Community Service Directory, the HIP database, had nearly 80 community services programs and organizations operating in 49 locations in Acton. That's a lot. And some of them are regional organizations that touch down there, and some are rooted right in that community there. So it's a really strong network. This was, and here's Richard's mapped this for us, which is awesome to show us. And there's a legend there. So in the document, you can have a deeper dive in that, but you can see it's spread throughout. What we won't see as many are in the rural community, and there's some pretty interesting stories shared actually during the event about the needs in our very rural part of the community and where people don't have the same access to services, and that would be a concern for us. Most folks at the Near and Dear event were astonished at the number of agencies and services in Acton as we walk through them. And a key takeaway from this part of the community conversation was that there's an opportunity to increase communication amongst service providers and community organizations to share information, to collaborate for impact. This is probably our biggest takeaway from the whole day. And there were some really great things that had already started around a Google Doc that was forming around sharing that information. The library already has a gathering that they were doing of bringing some services together, and they realized there was an opportunity to bring together even more. So there were some things to be built on. So it was quite exciting. Associational life and community spaces. So I put those together here for you. Just added this is to belong is to be related to and part of something. It's a membership and the experience of being at home in the broad sense of the phrase. Belonging is best created when we join with other people and producing something that makes a place better. That's from Peter Block. So I think it's this idea of how all of these things come together to contribute. So we've included some of the sense of belonging in this section because it's part of that associational life and what happens when we connect with one another. So we've got some data from the sense of belonging survey. So again, this hasn't been published yet. So a little bit of a sneak peek. If you're coming to the June 5th header conference, you're going to see way more from our team and the Our Kids Network team who have been working on this data. But the majority of Acton respondents to the survey feel connected to their local community, and over half described their sense of belonging somewhat strong, while nearly a quarter reported very strong sense of belonging, meaning that approximately 3/4 of participants feel at least a moderate connection to their community. On the other hand, about 18.3% of respondents indicated a somewhat weak sense of belonging, and a smaller proportion reported very weak ties with their community. So they may face social. What we found when we've cut through this data is the folks who feel the least sense of connection and community through or sense of belonging are those who experience disability, those from newcomers, diverse people living in low income situations, folks from the LGBTQ community, and those are the communities that experience this the least in terms of belonging in our community. Things for us to look for. We asked in the survey about social ties, and you can see that that we have some data. This is just for Acton, and so serving others in community or neighbors help to make the community and the neighborhood a better place. The top always is 5 and not at all is rarely, or rarely is 1. How people scored that, and you can see the majority around that sort of the mid range on, getting close to a fair bit, sort of running in these middle all the way across. So I serve others in the community, my neighbors, and I know each other's names. Fair number of those who responded. In Acton, I volunteer or help without pay in my community. So that's interesting numbers, but not at all has a highest number on that one. So that's something for us to maybe to capitalize in Acton in terms of the number of folks volunteering and knowing what their opportunities are. We wanted to see if there's other data out there. And of course, we do lots of work with our friends at Our Kids Network, and they have a great survey out. And this is just for kindergarten parents. So just to give you scope on this, it's not the whole community, but their 2023 kindergarten parent survey work is just fabulous. And in this report, Acton had the highest reported positive neighborhood cohesion in Halton at 69% for this slice of the population, referring to the level of trust and connections that people feel with their neighbors. The question is developed through social relationships, sense of belonging, neighbors working together to make sure that the neighborhood is safe and a place where others are thriving. And so part of me wonders, and maybe for small group conversation, does a smaller community create more neighborhood cohesion? You have more opportunity to rub shoulders with more people, or does that have anything to do with it at all? What are the other factors that create neighborhood cohesion from your perspective? So great data from OKN. We like to look at civic engagement, and just a voter turnout is a way of looking at that, and relatively low participation rates suggest potential challenges, maybe a disconnect between residents and local government. So this is a municipal election voter turnout, and barriers to participation this is from our last one. This is data from the town of Halton Hills. Barriers to participation, including lack of awareness, time constraints, could be demographic factors, young people not valuing voting. Maybe we've seen a change in that. It'll be interesting to see if the federal slightly higher participation rate influences our next municipal voting. Looking at some charitable giving. So a greater share of Acton residents participate in charitable giving. Their individual contributions are on average about 14% less though than tax filers across the province. Younger tax filers in Acton 0 to 24 donated significantly less. Middle-age groups also donated less, but in contrast, older adults in Acton, those aged 55 to 64 in Acton, were the most generous group, donating an average of $3,050, which is 440 more than the provincial counterparts, which is quite interesting. There was quite a bit of chatter about that when we got together at Near and Dear to talk about the role of older adults in the Acton community as mentors and as examples for the rest of the community, but also that their financial status may be in better shape than those who are younger than them, given the current economic times. I just also want to share, these are pictures from Acton. That's Fairy Lake, and there's a picture of Leathertown there for you on the festival. Stories about the importance of parks, festivals, markets, community centers, gardens, and annual fall fair were all took some center stages. There's a story about a lamb and a lamb that got away from the Acton Fall Fair and how the whole community got together to get the lamb. We told stories of the Acton Community Garden that is in the Fairy Lake in the park there. Just lots of lovely stories about Acton and the cohesiveness that comes. And people talked a lot, and some of our peer researchers sent some specific pieces to say, please add more about space and the role that it takes around that it plays in community building for us. And when we're thinking about a profile of our community, we cannot forget the importance of spaces, the local market that will just be ramping up this month, and the things and the connections that happen where people rub shoulders. Some challenges raised by the group was transportation. There's a lack of affordable and accessible transportation in the town of Acton and Halton Hills in general. It creates barriers to social and economic cohesion at times, is what people felt. There is some transportation for youth, and then they have an active van program, which is important for those with disabilities and older adults who are struggling with mobility. But they felt like there's a middle section of folks who are left out. And so that people wanted to raise that. Houses with related supports. These are what we used to call dom hostels. There's all of the houses. This is a category of kind of like a group home, houses with related supports in Acton, or sorry, in the Halton community. All of them are in Acton. And these are folks that have some significant vulnerability. A lot of folks with disability and very financially vulnerable folks. We know in other data points that with Ontario Works, some of the folks who are most at risk in our province are those who are unattached individuals, and these folks would represent them. And they are important. Community members, they show up at things, they're very present, and there's lots of supports for them, or a lot of grassroots sort of wraparound supports for them. But these are a group of people that people at Near and Dear felt very concerned about in terms of their disconnection because of finances and disability and lack of supports to broader connection in community, and something that people wanted to flag and are concerned about, and we'll be working on. Declining youth volunteerism was a concern raised by the group. And again, the Our Kids Network research reports on survey with grades 7 and 10 show that 3/4 of students report a sense of belonging, but that means that 1 in 4 didn't. So key takeaways from the conversation on Acton's associational life and spaces included that there was lots to grateful for with caring neighbors and groups. Information sharing and collaboration in the institutional and grassroots level would create an even stronger Acton. So that idea of getting together and doing some more collaboration and understanding each other better. Necessary to ensure a wide range of partners that come to the table to share and plan for community, including transportation, housing providers, and a rural perspective, just to name a few. Community planning must include the perspective of youth and include the voice of lived experience is vital. We noticed during our Near and Dear event that there were no youth at the table, that the voice of lived experience, really those folks weren't part of the conversation, and we wanted to say that out loud and make sure that folks were part of planning. Folks who are not traditionally invited, making sure everyone's perspective was involved going forward. So looking at some challenges, income, government challenges, lower medium income across various family and individual categories compared to both Halton Hills and the broader Halton region. So Acton has a higher proportion of single earner families, particularly single mother households. And the median amount of income transfers for Acton families is approximately 3 times higher than the median amount for Halton Hills and Halton region. So I don't know, Richard, if you wanted to say anything. When we were looking at tax filer data, this is where this comes from. Earlier in the year, actually it was like last fall, Richard was like, whoa, what's happening in Acton? And I don't know if you had an insight you wanted to share.
No, I think that again, it's really the insufficient income that people had to live on, and they had to turn to uh, government, provincial or federal, and these are the government transfer in terms the amount they would give it to family that are in need.
Absolutely. I think what's interesting is if you look at our other maps in like our map on post-poverty, post-pandemic poverty, Acton doesn't always like flag as a community that maybe is as at risk as Milton or North Oakville. But when we start to look at this data in particular, and looking at all families, those couple families, but then those lone parent families and the non-family persons, those are individuals not attached to a family. Yeah, there's some real concern there, and helps to explain the story about what one might see when you're in Acton and experience. In terms of yeah, this other poverty data, we have in Acton, there's a 12.2% poverty rate, and we've got sorry, I'm just going to move this so I can see. So 12.2% of the residents lived in poverty in 2022. Again, this is tax filer data. So we try to provide the most updated. It's slightly different than what you get when you read the census. This is over 1 in 10 individuals are living in poverty in Acton, and in a small community. Those are numbers that start to really show up. You can see the poverty rates, again, those non-family persons, 27.4%, single parent families, you know, at 22.6%. So this is really where those two population groups are people that we really need to be paying attention to when we're planning for Acton, and other communities as well. Yes, Richard.
I can add, like the census definitely collect much more information, so we're able to disaggregate the data further down. So, for example, for the single parent families, the census data can allow us to go into single mother or single father families.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, in the tax file data, they did not make the distinction. So we are not able to break down the single parent families poverty rate by gender.
Yeah.
So they did collect the information. So we try and make a point to StatCan to see if they will consider that definite separation between single father and single mother family. I think that would be another data point we can look at.
Yes. Thanks, Richard, because we do know when we look at those other pieces that from the 2020 data from the census that our single mother families are much more at risk than single dads, like quite significantly. So again, population to look for and some advocacy to do.
Yeah, if my memory serves me right, I think it's about 80% of the single parent families are single mother families.
Yes. Yeah, I think you're right about that. We also have some data on the Acton poverty gap. So a poverty gap is a difference between the poverty threshold and the median after-tax income of the family or individual or family. So what we have, you can see here is, yeah, that we have for a poverty threshold for a couple with a family with 2 children is 50,836 with the median after tax of 3380. So the poverty gap for the family is that 17,000 or 34% below the poverty threshold. Richard, did you want to explain that further at all?
See the number in the bracket, the poverty threshold is a benchmark or threshold where if people earn less than that, is considered in poverty. And the dark purple is the median income of those population group. So if you subtract that from the threshold, you get something like 17,000, which is a gap there. Even to make up to the poverty threshold, that individual or that population group still need $17,000 a year to do that. So it's a big, we consider that they are in deep poverty, not just below the poverty threshold, but further down that particular number.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. So, just, what are people seeing on the ground? So obviously those are some things, and those gathered in conversation with this data felt that they had anecdotal evidence of increasing need in the community. Again, increased demand in free programming, seeing that, and people accessing services, including food supports. Giving the large number of adults with disabilities in the community, centralized to downtown area. They're a visible group in need of support. And again, to community's credit and the individual's credit, they're lovely folks, and they're trying to connect in community, and there's formal and grassroots efforts to assist those individuals. So some observations around household food insecurity. So in Acton, again, huge response to the food security survey that we did back in the winter. And we know that looking broadly at Halton, that, again, I expressed those limitations, but that we'd seen a food program, household food program access increased by about 25% between 2023 and 2024. So lots of increase and lots of anecdotal and stresses that we hear at the front line on that. So in Acton, charitable food organizations offer a range of essential services, including meal programs, coffee hours, lunches, community dinners, food and grocery vouchers, food banks, cooperative community garden, food delivery services. So Acton has it all. And actually, not everybody always knew. Everybody in the room, there was a number of organizations in this space that were providing food supports, and it was really good for them to be connecting in that space. So over the past year, the demand for these services dramatically increased over the past year, with Acton experiencing a 40% increase in use between 2023 and 24. We think that every food program in Acton responded to our survey, so we feel fairly confident in sharing that with you. Again, some limitations around how people measure things, but or report things, but definitively a growth rate, 15%, potentially higher than the average across Halton. So big need there. Again, people who came to the event were really struck by the number of food security programs, and they were involved in a number of existing food initiatives, and that they had not taken a step back to look at the larger picture in community. And this event was able to have them take the big look. So there's great examples of how groups were collaborating in the area of food security, but there are also consensus that much more could be done in this way on such an important topic. Affordable housing. Housing affordability represents another significant challenge for many Acton residents, particularly renters and low-income households. In 2021, 14% of homeowners and 40% of renters in Acton faced housing affordability issues. So it's not just renters, actually 40% of renters, but also homeowners, 14%. Meaning that they spent more than 30% of their income on shelter costs. That financial strain leaves little room from other basics, right? And that's why we will see food insecurity use, program use, and needing to access free programming, etc. So coming in for the end here, usually we have insights on and calls to action around policies, and I think I could say we need to all be advocating around income and equity. And another provincial budget has come and gone, and don't think much happened in terms of have to take a deeper dive today, but in terms of addressing Ontario works rates, which haven't been changed since 2018, our housing crisis, and there's need for policy change around rent control and all sorts of other issues around housing. So we could talk about that, and we should continue to talk about that. But I wanted to focus on what community said are the calls to action. So increase community information sharing about community resources, and share data on community issues like mental health and addiction issues to better support those most vulnerable in our community. People in the room at Near and Dear Acton held a lot of information, a lot of data from all different agencies. And so can you imagine if we all brought that to the table, how much of an even deeper picture we would be able to paint? Sustainable funding for groups working to care for those most vulnerable in the community, work to collaborate to increase impact. Sustainable funding is an ongoing issue for the nonprofit sector. community and nonprofit partnerships with the town and region for more housing advances. Ensuring youth and the voice of lived experience are part of future community planning. We mentioned that, and so important to note. Capitalize on existing community structures like the partnership group that the Halton Hills Library hosts and expanding its membership. Weave together existing community assets to build community solutions. Strengthen community opportunities where everyone is welcomed in and connections can thrive. Enhance access to community services through strategic investments in co-located and multi-purpose community spaces. So those spots where you can go in and access food security programs, but get information on housing or healthcare services. And thinking back to the wealth of services in Acton, how do we co-locate and multi-purpose those spaces? Strengthening social connections by fostering inclusive community engagement initiatives that address barriers to participation. So those, I'm going to stop sharing. See our faces again. That is sort of the information that we collected. Not every single data point that is in the paper. There's lots more there, but I'm going to stop talking because we would like to take some time. That was long. This is one of our longer papers. I'd like to go quickly to a small group conversation. So, don't be afraid. I'm here. I will stay back with anybody who doesn't want to go in a small group, but love, the question is, what opportunities exist for you to use data and community insights to address community challenges and build community where you are? So some of you are from Acton and might be part of that, and others of you will be part of other parts of Halton region. I'd love to talk about what other opportunities are there for us to talk about community assets and the data and bring those together for solutions.
Okay, I've got rooms ready to go. We'll put
All right.
3 or 4 folks in each room.
Great.
So I'm going to open those up now.
Okay.
Jump in, meet someone new, and let's have a
Great.
chat.
Super. I'll put that question in, Heather.
Yeah, and if you want to jump in, I can wait here.
Okay.
I'm going to move Christy because she's in a room with nobody. I'm going to move her to room 3. Okay. So why don't you jump into room 4 because only 2 people there.
Okay.
All right, and I'll so 6-7 minutes. Hi Faiza, if you're available, I can pop you into a room.